Luke chapter 24, the last chapter in Luke, and Jesus talking to these two on the road to Emmaus, about a 7-mile journey out of Jerusalem, on the first Lord's Day. Pretty incredible that they would set out. They were in Jerusalem. As we're going to see, they seemed to know a lot, and yet they were leaving. And I found this interesting. This is a comment that I came across, and maybe you can let me preface this, because Linda's here, and I have to say this for Linda. You'll see in your notes, Linda, that the title here is Walking Alone at Eve. I was thinking, as we sit around the table and enjoy all enjoy too much sometimes, that it's good to just go out for a walk. And the scenery has just been beautiful. I don't know why it just overtakes me. Last night there was this beautiful crescent moon. I was visiting Wendy and Richard last night, and I told Wendy when I got there, this moon is gorgeous, and she had to go outside to see it. So, does that surprise you sometimes when you say, hey, I just saw something, and somebody says, I want to go see it? I thought that was interesting. I said, you better hurry because it's setting. It was it was the setting moon last night, early. But it just looked like that crescent was sparkling. Just looked like it was. Yeah, but it was so bright, the way because it's following the sun, and I don't know, it just, I love it. In case you didn't know that, I do love it. And it's not lost on me, Q. Q says, I came up after Q sang this beautiful song, and he said, I said it was gloomy after Q said it was great. I love it. I love this time of year. I love the gray sky. It just, everything makes me think of this Thanksgiving, and we got the cornucopia in there. We had this beautiful Thanksgiving dinner here last week, and that just set me in the right mood. But walking alone at Eve, I want us to think about who we are. We have a very intimate family here today. One I would say is rather mature, and I believe we're at a very great moment in time for us in our congregation and in what is happening in the body. I'm always interested when I travel to see what is the Spirit up to. What are people talking about? What are they thinking about? And so I want us to consider this. I'm going to present this today in a way that we are entering what we call the holiday season. And what it means is when people just pop in. We had our dinner on Friday, and my mom was a little shook up because her friend Al's kids just popped in. They happened to be driving by, and they decided to stop in unannounced. And I just love that about this season, that every once in a while somebody will just come knocking on your door, and they're just be ready. We're to be hospitable. And it was neat. My brother came over yesterday, and I went over. I said, well, come with me to Wendy and Richard's. We'll walk over there. And so everybody has stuff they need done, right? And I said, well, my brother's over here. Let's put him to work. And so we got a lot of tasks, more tasks, because we need more things to do, Claudia, right? We don't have enough to do. Fellowship. As we have fellowship with people, I want us to see, and this lesson today, Linda, is going to be very easy to look at the text. So even if you don't keep up, the words are in this text, 31 through 35. But listen to this. One of the greatest proofs of the resurrection of Jesus is that none of his followers expected it to happen. I came across that, and it just, I hadn't thought about it. Richard was just mentioning to me earlier that we do entertain some pretty incredible thoughts, and sometimes they're not profitable. But I thought that was very interesting as an observation, that let's look at the account here of Jesus' resurrection from Luke. It starts in actually back in verse 10 of Luke 24, where it had Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other woman with them, who told these things to the apostles, but these words seemed to them like an idle tale. They did not believe them. Verse 12, but Peter rose and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went home, marveling at what had happened. So I'm reading this from the English Standard Version, the ESV. And so this is in the morning, right? So we know the account. The women go to the tomb on the first day of the week. It's the third day. The stone is rolled away. The body's not there. They don't know what to make of it. They recount this: men in dazzling clothes, these angels came to them and told them, why are you seeking the living, or the dead from the living? And they go back and tell this group of disciples that was waiting back at this room, and they don't really believe them, yet Peter bolts out there. Now, I've made some observations in our studies as we've been going through this, that Peter, we a lot of times categorize Peter as this impulsive one, but I've come to respect Peter as an elder in the group. He's the older one, and he takes the point. So of course he's going to go out there and check this out. But in verse 12 it says, he sees, the women were right, but he doesn't know what to make of it, and he goes home. And so starting in verse 13, now you have these two men, right? This is the same day, and they were there, they heard this. But now they're on their way to this village called Emmaus, and they're talking about these things. In verse 15, while they're talking and discussing together, Jesus himself just comes up near them, but they don't recognize him. And so he says in verse 17, what are you guys talking about? Well, I want us to see this so that I think this will be helpful over the holidays, because I know you do this, and I know you think this way, and I do the same thing. I'm always looking for ways to relate, and you never know who you're talking to and who picks up the conversation and may ask you later. But Jesus, he's like, what are you guys talking about as you're walking along here? And they stood still, verse 17, and they're looking sad. So verse 18, one of them named Cleopas answered him, are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened in these days? Can you imagine somebody comes up to you and what a spectacle. When we read things, oftentimes we just read sections like this and we're not in the mood for it, basically. These two men are leaving a spectacle. This whole process that started with Jesus coming in on a colt, and they're throwing palm branches down and they're saying, oh, Hosanna, blessed is he. And there's a celebration. It was exuberant. And then it turned dark and chaotic, and they put this man to death. What a spectacle. What an emotional roller coaster. And I've got to believe this place was packed, right? I mean, this was Jesus' third Passover. He's got quite a following. Everybody knows what's going on. And they come there, and now they've been witnessing this, and these guys are walking back, and somebody comes up and says, "What are you guys talking about?" And what? Don't you know? Don't you have Twitter? I love it. That's what we do. We chirp at each other. We chit-chat along the way. Everybody knows what's going on. Nobody does not know Jesus in this whole area. And verse 19, he said, "What things?" And he wants their perspective on this. So they said, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people." He's a prophet. Just on the surface, when you think of the word prophet, oftentimes, or prophecy, we tend to think of somebody predicting the future. And prophets did tell of events that were going to happen that God wanted us to know beforehand so we'd be ready for it. But a prophet is somebody that literally speaks for God, is a mouth for God. And I would say, generally speaking, that Old Testament prophets were foretelling what New Testament prophets were explaining was fulfilled. And Jesus is this great prophet, mighty in deed and word. But verse 20 says, "But our chief priests and rulers, they delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him." Here's a prophet, mighty in deeds and word, and they crucified him. And to somebody who has somewhat of a knowledge of Israel's history, they might, if they were like me, sarcastic, they might say, "What else is new? They killed a prophet. Isn't that what Israel does?" But verse 21, these two said, "But we had hoped this was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it's now the third day since these things had happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning." They were in this spectacle, these two men. They were on this roller coaster ride. I'm hoping that as I'm relating this to you, you can think of your own circumstances. How when you come to understand Jesus, who he really is, what a roller coaster, Marion, you get on, right? I mean, you want to share this, you want to help other people understand this and share your excitement about what you've discovered, and they don't always accept it so well. Hey, well, I've been telling us we're in good company here. Here's two men that were there at the scene, and they're leaving on the very day that Jesus rose. But he says in verse 23, when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the woman said, but they did not see him. You know, sometimes when we're in a situation and we just talk it out, some of the things, even while we're saying it, I would say Mary and I were having fun with this because we're going through Paul's letter to the Romans. And often in that letter, I think Paul says things, he says, wow, what did I just say? Read that back to me. That's pretty profound. It's almost the opposite of when you wake up at night and you had a dream and you try, I want to remember this dream, and you try to explain it, or if somebody's there and you want to explain that dream to them, if you can still remember it when you see somebody, and you start explaining it, and you say, it was horrifying. I was so terrified by this. And then when you start explaining it, you say, gee, it sounds kind of silly now, doesn't it? But now they're retelling this story, and I'm imagining what's going through their mind while you're walking away. And they're relating this information. Watch verse 25. He said to them, O foolish ones and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets had spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And it's interesting to me when we read these accounts that we can follow the flow of this conversation, but the reality is, I mean, these guys are walking away from a spectacle. Somebody joins them, they're recounting what's going on, and you're like, how do you not know this? And then he turns the question back on them and says, well, wasn't it necessary for Christ to suffer and then enter into his glory? Now, verse 27. And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. It's interestingly enough here, that word, he opened up the scriptures to them, is the Greek word is where we get the word hermeneutics, which is, so he explained to them. So hermeneutics is how we relate, how we explain what was going on in the scriptures. We were talking about this morning in our class, that John is presenting this gospel in John chapter 10 about Jesus as the good shepherd, and they're having a hard time with what he's saying. We were looking at this morning how God always had this idea of one flock, that he was going to bring one flock together, because the purpose of God was never about Israel. It was always about God's plan to reconcile man. That was God's plan. And now he's bringing this back up to them. So, verse 28, so they're coming to the village where they're going. He acted like he's going on, and they said, no, stay with us. You know, the day is over. So they go in, and verse 30, they're at the table with him, and he took the bread and blessed and broke it, and he gave it to them. And here's our text, verse 31. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. So they said to each other, verse 32, did our hearts not burn within us while he talked to us on the road and opened to us the scriptures? And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, the Lord has risen indeed, and he appeared to Simon. Verse 35, then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. So, verse 31, their eyes were open. See Jesus. If we can see Jesus, truly see Jesus, then things become clearer. You cannot read the Old Testament scriptures with understanding without looking at it through the eyes of Jesus. Remember, when this prophet comes, you're to listen to him. No longer do we listen to Moses and the prophets. We listen to the prophet that was foretold. When he comes, he's going to make sense of all of that. I've spent a week going through Isaiah, just listening to Isaiah. There's so much in Isaiah, and it really doesn't, it's a difficult book. It's one of the largest books of the prophets. And it's like reading the Psalms almost. That when you read through the Psalms, there's these nuggets in the Psalms that, wow, that's really good. And then you read some other stuff, and I wonder as I read through Scripture sometimes, there's just a point in my life, wherever I am, that certain things are going to jump out at me, just because I'm ready to see it. But number one, Linda, see Jesus. See Jesus. When they were on the Mount of Transfiguration and Moses and Elijah were there and they disappeared and Jesus is left alone, and God says, you listen to him. And then we can see things clearly. We mentioned this morning, right? So Jesus comes and he presents himself as the good shepherd. But more than that, he says everyone else is a thief and a robber. So it's decision time. Jesus doesn't just say, I am somebody good. He said, I'm the only one. And verse 32, did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us and opened up the Scriptures? So number two, after we see Jesus, we need to see the Scriptures. Jesus lived the Word that was foretold about him. That's profound, as Bradley likes to point out profundities to us. That is profound. He lived the Word. So, but now we can see the Scriptures through the life of Jesus. That's amazing. A few years ago, we were here, and Stuart was telling us about one of his teachers that could look at any passage in the Bible. This image always stayed to me because I want this for myself, where he said, he used this analogy like the Bible is transparent, and any verse in the Bible connects to every other verse in the Bible. But it takes a long time, Marion, to see that, right? To have all the pieces kind of meshed together. But after a while, all the verses, it's the Word, it's the Scriptures, and it's God's Word, and it's His revelation to us. And Jesus was that fleshly component that lived that Word perfectly. So we need to see Jesus. We need to see the Scriptures. As we do, now the story starts to live in us. So the Hebrew writer in verse 4:12, this Word is living and active. It's going to have its effect on us. If you drop down in verse 45, he says, he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures. Isn't that what Jesus' ministry was all about? They kept coming to him, we don't understand. We don't understand. Explain this to us. Because they were thinking a certain way. Let me just share a couple of passages of Paul after Paul's conversion in Acts. Acts 17, 2 and 3. You know these real well. And Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead, and saying, this Jesus whom I proclaim to you is the Christ. And then over in 18 verse 23, after spending time there, he departed and went from one place to the next through the region of Galatia and Phrygia, strengthening all the disciples. So I have that right? Oh, I'm sorry. No. Forgive me. 28, not 18. 28. Acts 28, 23. When they had appointed a day for him, they came to him at his lodging in great numbers. From morning till evening, he expounded to them, testifying to the kingdom of God and trying to convince them about Jesus, both from the law of Moses and from the prophets. It's pretty interesting to me that how, and like I say, for me, I'm the beneficiary of being here all week, Q, with all these multiple studies going on. It elevates me. I mean, and the fact that they all keep converging together. So what I'm saying, and Mary and I have been having these conversations because in our evening study tonight in Romans is how these things are coming to light. We read this week, we took a pause this week in our Wednesday classes and we went into, we were looking at Philippians, just Paul's letter to the Philippians. And it struck me as I was looking at, Richard mentioned his letter to Timothy and Titus, and what is Paul doing? He's doing the same thing we need to be doing. Verse 33 of our text, Luke 24:33. After Jesus opens up the scriptures to them, it says, they rose the same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together. Linda, 33, see others. Once we see Jesus and we see the scriptures, we need to be with others. And we need to talk this out. We need to ask questions and have this fellowship. And then we need to continue the conversation. And Richard was trying to steal my thunder this morning, so it's right here, Richard. I was going to get to it. I said, oh my goodness, he hit what I'm going to preach on. Verse 34, saying, the Lord has risen. Verse 34, we need to say, the Lord has risen. That's the gospel message. That when we're having fellowship, what are we talking about? We've all been, because we're just getting in this age where we're losing people all around us. And it teaches us, or should teach us, to count our days. We don't have unlimited time here. We all know people and have influence. And what is the conversation about? Because I know when I lose somebody, why didn't I find a way? Right? I've done a lot to push people away. I can be pretty intense. But you got to be gentle with your family and look for these opportunities. And what I'm saying is, while we're having fellowship, my family, I've told you guys, we need a lot of healing. My family is the typical dysfunctional family, and we can get pretty crazy. And we're trying to rein that in because the generations, it's really been pretty tense. It didn't help to be separated in all these different ways over the last few years. But we got to find a way to come together. And by the way, those family members that really get on your nerves, I mean, one day they may see the light. And I mentioned during the week, Alice, right, that Christmas Carol. I love the Christmas Carol because the nephew, in one of the scenes, right, where Ebenezer is traveling around and visiting folks, and the nephew is there, and I found it interesting that the nephew doesn't overstep what he could say about his uncle. What if the people that annoy us, do we say bad things about them, not considering that one day they may be reconciled to God? I was saying I had a cousin that committed suicide the end of last year. And we had, I got pretty intense with him, and he pushed me away at different times, but he did call me aside and one day when I got back from China, and he apologized to me. And he said, he goes, I know I give you a hard time, always, always. He just, not just me, everybody. He just gives everybody a hard time. But he said, I listen to what you say. That struck me when I was at Ron's service, when his friends got up and spoke, that they heard what Ron was saying. Ron was communicating what he was learning to them, and they heard it. And so, verse 34, the Lord is risen. You got to do something with that. Well, we got to find a way to present that at a time where they can hear it. So verse 35, look at this. Then they told what happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. And this is why I wanted to have this for as we meet in sweet communion, in fellowship with family and friends in this holiday season. When we're breaking bread, that is the most intimate fellowship. You don't sit down and break bread with your enemies generally. You have friends over. You're hospitable. And in that breaking of the bread, share Jesus in fellowship. It really is remarkable to me as I'm seeing family members now as they're getting older and they're missing out on such sweet communion. Not just now, it's not going to get any better as we get older. Either we're going on or people around us are going on. That's a reality of life. But to have such sweet fellowship, and we have an opportunity if we're paying attention, and I think the moment is here. Man, oh man, the four of us, the 3 students and I, got our flights booked to go down to this workshop at the end of January in Lubbock and spend time where they get to spend half the week with their classmates in class, including Philip, who most of you don't believe exists yet, but you will see him. They're so excited to get down there and have this fellowship. Listen, this is discipling, are lessons in leadership from the Master. A leadership that doesn't ask us to lead like the world leads, where you've got to go and do everything for everybody. A leader is a servant. Just be hospitable. Just serve. Just see Jesus in everything that you do. See the scriptures and see others so that we get together and this word comes alive when we're together and we're talking about it. When we have this great fellowship. And then we need to say, the Lord is risen, and share Jesus in fellowship. This opportunity, it comes, people are so receptive. They want to hear from you. They want to know there's hope in the world. And sometimes in certain settings, they just won't say it. But you never know when you just get up and say, no, I got to go for a walk, and somebody says, I'll go with you. You know, it amazed me when I was teaching driver ed, and I got to drive around with mostly teenagers. Not always, but mostly. And remarkable. It was profound to me that how open the toughest kids could be when they're even my own. I helped all my nephews and my niece get their license as well. And many of the kids here that aren't here anymore. Matt used to drive. Matt used to drive every night out to Southington. We used to go to karate together, Irene. I used to have to tell him every week how to get there. I'm like, you drive every week here, Matt. Don't you know the way by now? He goes, you just tell me which way to go. But how much, when you get one-on-one with somebody, how open they are. And they really do listen. Everyone has the same questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? What does all this mean? Where am I going? And the reality that Jesus rose is the greatest hope, and it confirms everything for us. The reason why we come together, one of the reasons why we have this great fellowship, is because when those questions, there are things keeping people from accepting this, and that's where we come in. That's where we can have, I felt the same way. Feel, felt, found. I know exactly what you're going through, and this is what I found, and have those conversations. Don't miss this, and you know why I do? I do this every cycle, every holiday cycle. I learn something so that when I go into the next one, right, I got to do better the next time. So thank you guys again so much. We had a wonderful meal last Saturday. It was just awesome. It set me off in a good mood, and then just great times throughout the week. So as Q said, if you don't have a place, or you know somebody that would be interested in a study, if you, for whatever reason, don't want to host that yourself, let us know. We'll find a way to accommodate people's schedules, but we need more fellowship, and then I'm really looking forward to wait till you see these guys when they come back from this workshop. I'm really excited about that. I think you'll see a little change in attitude too about their desire to want to be together. I haven't debriefed Philip yet on his visit to Kent County last week, so I'm looking forward to that. But just wonderful. Listen, we have this invitation song. We sing an invitation song because we want an opportunity to whatever's on our minds, whatever's on our hearts, kind of be thinking about that during the invitation. But also, it's always a call to come up and make your requests known, but certainly on a large scale. I was talking with Jack about this earlier, about those big venues where people want to come forward when they hear the gospel message and say, yeah, I want to be a part of that. There's an opportunity there as well. But Q, lead us in an invitation song, and if there's something that's on your heart and you want it to be known or pray about, make it known.